Ladies and gentlemen, sports fans alike, welcome to another edition of Bill Swerski, Sports Talk Chicago. One of the couple, two, three best podcasts around. So sit back, grab yourself a cold one and a Polish sausage, park your keister in the French room, and listen to Bill Swerski, Sports Talk Chicago.
In Chicago, you know that all sports rock. The Bears, Hawks, Bulls, Cubs, and Sox. Pick your favorite, you can choose. As long as the Packers lose. For everything you need to know, it's Bill Swerski, Sports Talk Chicago. Bill Swerski, Sports Talk Chicago.
Hey everybody, welcome to another edition of Bill Swerski, Sports Talk Chicago. This is your host, Sean. On this episode, we have major injury hitting the Chicago Bears, and the Cubs absolutely on cruise control on this episode of Bill Swerski Sports Talk Chicago. But first, I'd like to thank our sponsor, the Rockford Ice Hogs. If you're not familiar with the Rockford Ice Hogs, they're the AHL minor league affiliate of the Chicago Blackhawks. What does that mean for you? It means you get to see the stars of tomorrow today at a family-friendly, affordable price. Only 90 minutes from the city limits, and fun for the whole family, where you don't have to take out a second mortgage to go to the game. Check them out at icehogs.com. Get season tickets or single game tickets from icehogs.com for the upcoming season starting in October. Tell them Swerski Sports sent you. Well, ladies and gents, thank you guys for listening to another episode of Swerski Sports. I'm sorry it didn't come out on Sunday, which it normally does, but my stepdad is in the hospital he's recovering from cancer surgery, doing fine, but we were at the hospital visiting, and so I didn't get a chance to record. Sorry about that. But I want to thank you guys all for listening. It means a lot. I'm getting so many more questions and emails, and when I miss an episode, people contacting me and asking me what's going on, when is it coming out. It's really a good feeling. It's the reason I do this show. So for those of you that are just checking this out, or a refresher for those of you, because I haven't said it in a while, the reason we do this show is to by the fans for the fans show. If you listen to certain Score Afternoon show, they hate their fans. They absolutely despise them. They despise their fans, make fun of them, and they don't want to deal with them. They only have them on the air so they can be angry and poo-poo them. This is different. I'm just a guy, just like their guys. We're just talking sports. We all have an opinion on it. We all watch it. I just have the microphone. If you ever want to come on the show and talk about your opinions, you are more than welcome to come on. You just want me to read your question or comment, I can do that too. If you think what I'm saying is stupid and you want to argue it, be my guest. You can always hit us up, SwerskiSports.com, Twitter at SwerskiSports, or Facebook.com/SwerskiSports. Any of those ways, and we will get in touch with you, or you can get in touch with us. So let's jump right into this. We're going to talk Cubs first, and then we're going to break into the Chicago Bears. I might mention a thing or two about the Chicago White Sox, but I'm pretty annoyed with them, so we may not. There may be just a 30-second blurb there between the Cubs and the Bears. So Cubs, then end it with Bears. We'll go from there. So I had a lot of things to talk about with the Cubs, and this will be a recurring theme here. It sort of just got changed up a lot, and I've got quite a few questions from Cubs fans and Bears fans, but we'll go through these first. Since we last recorded, we have had absolute Cubs domination, and it's been fantastic to watch. It's a great feeling. The Cubs they've won 10 of their last 11 and 7 in a row. It feels so good. You look at the standings, and you could just see it in the standings, where they've got an 11.5 game lead on the Cardinals. 11.5 games. We're at August 8th today. There's like 7 more weeks of the season, and they have an 11.5 game lead based on ab initio calculations and Monte Carlo calculations. These brainiacs, they do simulations of all the rest of the games based on what's happened and how the players are playing and blah blah blah, and they basically all but guarantee that the Cubs will win this division. It's almost a foregone conclusion. And I don't want to jinx anything. I'm not a huge believer in jinxing, but if you guys are, I don't want to do that. It's a great team. They're fun to watch, and barring any sort of catastrophic injury, this has just been a fantastic run they're on. And the Cardinals are just almost rolling over and dying. They just lost a series to Cincinnati and lost another one to the Atlanta Braves, who are two of the worst teams in baseball. And they lost back-to-back series against those two. So the Cardinals are sort of rolling over and dying. The Pittsburgh Penguins, the Pittsburgh Pirates, they just can't get momentum. They're playing almost 500 baseball recently, so they just can't get any momentum. Milwaukee's so far out of it. Cincinnati's so far out of it. It's almost like the Cubs race to lose. And it started off this huge run because the Cubs had been struggling, playing like right around 500 baseball for a good part before the All-Star break, and then coming back and being streaky, losing back-to-back games to the White Sox, and then they come into those two home games against the White Sox and start turning it around. And we talked about that last week, but then you get some signature wins. I'm a big believer in baseball in momentum type things that help to propel you. Look at last year. The Cubs were a nice little team. They were playing well. It was fun to watch. And then they had that 4-game series against the Giants. Now some might say, well, the Giants didn't have Madison Bumgarner pitching. And whatever the case may be, the Cubs swept all 4 games from the Giants, and that propelled them to this incredible run where they caught up to Pittsburgh and wound up with that last wild card spot and went on to go on to the National League Championship Series against the Mets. It was a fantastic run, and it was all spurred by that 4-game momentum swing of beating the Giants. And I can't say for certain because you don't know what these things are when they're happening. You can take a guess. You can say this sounds good, but really when you go back and reflect after the season is over, you can kind of look back and say, oh, this is the moment it happened. But I'm going to put my money where my mouth is and say I really think it's those 2 games this past week where the Cubs came back to win. And the first one was the Cubs started Brian Mattis, and we'll talk about that in a minute. But he absolutely just bombed. He gave up a trio of 2-run homers, and the Cubs were down 6-0 to King Felix. If you're a baseball fan, I mean, there's people on this site that are listening that podcast fans that they're not huge baseball fans per se. They're just big Cubs fans, and that is fine. The more the merrier. But if you're not an American League fan or you're not a huge baseball guy, King Felix is phenomenal. He is a really, really good pitcher. And the Cubs were down 6-0 to this guy. This should have been lights out, game over. Cubs nurse their wounds and come back to try to bounce back to win this, to the next game. But the Cubs just didn't have any die in them. There was no giving up. They kept fighting. They kept fighting, and they worked King Felix to 100 pitches. And you're like, all right, well, so what? 100 pitches. It was the first time he had thrown 100 pitches since mid-May. Since mid-May, it was the first time he had thrown 100 pitches. So that's just the beauty of the Cubs, is even when they're not hitting, when they're not scoring runs, they're working the pitcher. They're working the count. They're building that pitch count up where eventually the that pitcher's going to start giving up runs, or you're going to have to take him out of the game and try to your hand at somebody else. And the Cubs came back and won that game, and it was just a thing of beauty. You had a great play by Wilson Contreras. You had Joe Madden with this bat poop crazy move of putting Travis Wood out in left field and then bringing him back into pitch. And what does he do? He makes an amazing catch against the wall, which a lot of people, I don't know if you guys remember, you're old enough to remember Kevin Mitchell. He played in the early 90s for the Giants. Big bopper with the bat, but he was an awful fielder. And he would just run head first into the wall. And Willie Mays was trying to teach him, listen, if you go to Chicago, don't do that. There's brick behind that ivy. It might look soft, but you are going to clobber your head. And so guys don't judge well of that brick wall there. And Travis Wood made a really nice play. And everything. And then you end up putting John Lester, who's one of the worst hitting pitchers in baseball, one of the worst overall hitters in baseball, and you put him in there to lay a squeeze bunt, and he does, wins the game. And I'm going to save a point, but the winning run was scored by Jason Hayward. So we'll talk about that a little more later. I had a listener email me and ask why they started Brian Mattis. Like, what was the point of that? And to be honest with you, I had no idea. You just pull this guy from out of the blue and you put him in there to start. And I get, if you try to tell me, hey, listen, we're trying to give people a rest. We're going to give somebody a stretch start. Think about what they did the one time they've done that already. And they had Adam Warren, and they sent him down to the minors to get ready to do a start. And it was planned out. They knew the date. This was not. This sort of just came out of the blue. And I looked into it more, and what happened is that Brian Mattis was contractually obligated to have a start before a certain date. He was obligated to have a start by the time free agency started, or the Cubs would have had to let him go. The Cubs' thinking was they also wanted to showcase this guy. They didn't want to let him go for nothing. They figured that the hope was that he would come in and that he would be able to pitch reasonably well, and the Cubs would be able to put him as part of a package to get somebody else. That was the hopes and dreams. And he just stunk. He stunk. They took him out, and then they DFA'd him after that. They were like, he's not worth anything. He's after the trade deadline. He's already shown he can't do anything. Just be done with him. So that was the reason. The Cubs, the ultimate goal was to showcase him one time. Oh, look what he can do when we worked our magic with him, our Jake Arrieta magic, and it just didn't work out. These things happen. But that wasn't all. That wasn't the only Cubs magic. They had more magic this week. They were down. I believe it was 3-1. 3-1 against the Marlins. And they scored one in an eighth inning, and they left a ton of runners on base. It was a bad inning. They scored a run, but they should have scored many more. They go into the bottom of the ninth against the Marlins closer, who arguably is one of the better closers in the league. I mean, if you look at his numbers, I believe he was saved 31 of 32 save opportunities up to that point. He was a really good. Sorry, I'm pulling up something right now. Is blah blah blah. So the Cubs were down going into the ninth inning, and they had a rally in the eighth that looked really promising, but they botched it, and it didn't go for enough runs. They go into the bottom of the ninth, and again, this was a Cubs team that just didn't want to quit. They were facing A.J. Ramos, who at that point was had saved 31 of 32 opportunities. So he was pretty much lights out, pitching really well this game. And he just couldn't throw strikes. And the Cubs really capitalized on this. You had Dexter Fowler hits a fly ball to tie the game or to score a run. They walk. Then Chris Bryant, he goes up there and strikes out. Anthony Rizzo, they walk him to load the bases. Then Ben Zobrist comes up and he draws a walk with the bases loaded to tie the game. And it was a great at bat. It was a really great at bat by Ben Zobrist because he had to lay off a lot of good pitches that were just outside the strike zone, and knowing AJ Ramos wasn't throwing strikes, gets the walk, brings home a run, ties the game. Wilson Contreras up with 2 outs, bottom of the ninth, tie score, bases loaded. Ramos throws a wild pitch. Matt Caesar comes home to score the game-winning run. Fantastic win. Those are 2 wins that just really show the energy of this team, the fight of this team, the scrappiness, and it just leads to this great run. And just a few more things I want to talk about the Cubs is somebody else asked me that going on these long runs. I'm gonna paraphrase here because the question was a little bit convoluted. Sorry if this is your question. It's a little bit convoluted, but the gist is the Cubs going on this winning streak. Is that help their chances going into the postseason? And honestly, no. I mean, it does in some ways. The ways it helps is pads your lead. So if you're up by enough games, you can clinch the postseason berth earlier, and that allows you to start resting guys. That allows you to line up your rotation the way you want it to. That means you don't have to pitch in that do or die 1-game playoff game like they did last year. So they ended up playing the Pirates, and then it really hurt them going into. I mean, they ultimately beat the Cardinals, but it set them up so Jake Arrieta couldn't get 2 starts in that series. If you have a nice series, you'd like to start off the game with your ace, then go to your number 2 guy, then your number 3 guy, et cetera, et cetera. That way you can hopefully, with a couple days off and maybe start an early game, you can ultimately get like a John Lester or Jake Arrieta to pitch twice in a series, which really helps you out. But they ended up having to pitch him in a 1-game playoff series, and that throws off your rotation a little bit. So if you go on and win your division and win early, you don't have to worry about that. You can set your rotation up. You can get it the way you want. You can try a few things out. You can play some of your bench guys to get them in the games. So there's nice for a lot of reasons, as you're well rested going into the playoffs. The bad part about it is I'm a huge believer in momentum as far as baseball goes. So I really feel like the hottest team is going to come in there and win. And look, I mean, it's not a guaranteed thing, but you want to go in there because when you're playing hot baseball, you're a tough team to beat. Like the Giants look like world beaters when they were on their streak, and now they seem to can't buy a game. The Cubs for like a couple of weeks couldn't buy consecutive wins. They just looked miserable. You're getting back to back Arrieta losses. Lester comes in and gets losses. The only guy that was winning was Kyle Hendricks, and now they just seem like they're unbeatable. And that's just the thing with baseball. It's very cyclical, and you want to hit the playoffs on your upswing when you're playing your best baseball, because then you're going to go in there like a buzzsaw. You could have the 110 win season, but if you go in flat in your worst time period in the postseason, you're going to get ripped up by somebody. There's too many good teams in this league. So that's the reason that you can be it's beneficial. But it's realistically is everybody resets their record when they go into the postseason. Everybody starts 0-0. And you have to go from there. You gotta win the division series. You gotta win the league championship series, and then you gotta win the World Series. You got to win all those games, and it's a tough road to go. What else? I had some notes in here. I wanted to talk about when Jorge Soler was going to return, because I had some inside scoop and that he was going to come back for the A's series, and lo and behold, he does. And then let's talk about this A's series. This A's series was another nice series of wins. Friday started off with a John Lester game, and he comes in there. And the beauty about being a National League team playing an American League team in the American League team city is you play with a DH. Now, you ask yourself all right, what's the big deal about that? It's just means the pitcher's not batting. Also means is a lot of times in the National League, the pitcher will come out in the 6th inning because a lot of times that's when they're due up for bat again. And at that point, you don't want to bat him again. You want to put a pinch hitter in for him. And so you take him out about the 6th inning. In the AL, when you're playing with the DH, you don't have to worry about that. You can pitch your starting pitcher a little longer, give a little more rest to your bullpen. And that was the philosophy that Joe Maddon had going into the series. He was going to try to get more innings out of his guys. So you had John Lester. He goes in and pitches 7 innings, gives up 2 earned runs and a 6-hitter, and they go in and take that first game against Oakland 7-2. Nice little win under his belt. You followed up with the second game of the series, and this is where you start getting the Jake Arrieta of old. Jake Arrieta comes and pitches 8 innings of 3-hit baseball, no runs, 1 walk, 4 strikeouts, and it just looks fantastic. He looks like, other than the number of strikeouts, he just looked like Jake Arrieta from last year and the beginning of this season. Super great to see. And they were facing Sonny Gray, who was a guy that the Cubs had really been interested in looking at. And don't look at his record. He's like 5-11, 5-12, something like that now. But he pitched really well. He pitched 5 innings, only 5 hits against the Cubs. I mean, they got 2 runs out of him. But the Cubs really couldn't figure him out that well. It was Ben Zobrist was the only one that really figured him out. So he's a good pitcher. He's on a rough team. And then the third and final game of the series is Cubs came in, and really it was a Sunday afternoon. They have a day off, coming back home. It would be really easy for them to go and just mail it in, and they don't. Kyle Hendricks comes in and pitches 7 1/3 with 3-hit baseball, no walks, 4 strikeouts. And his lone run he gave up was a solo home run. It was just a phenomenal game. And so he gave up it was in the 8th inning, he gave up a solo home run. That was the only run they scored. Pitched a fantastic game. And then Aroldis Chapman comes in the 9th and shuts it down. It was just a really great series by the Cubs. And I know Oakland's not a good team, and I know they seem to have given up a lot, but the Cubs had they went from a homestand to 3 games in Oakland, then back to a homestand. So it's a tough series to do, and they go in there and just absolutely dominate. And then the last thing I want to talk about with the Cubs is a pitcher that I just mentioned, is Kyle Hendricks. Kyle Hendricks has been an absolute godsend for this team. After that Brian Mattis debacle, the Cubs had to use a lot of their bullpen to get through that game. It was just, obliterated that bullpen. And going into the next game, is the Cubs really needed a great effort from Kyle Hendricks. Because they couldn't afford to play more of their bullpen guys, because they're just going to burn them out. And give the ball to Kyle Hendricks. What does he do? He goes in there and pitches a complete game victory. Shuts him down. He comes in there against Oakland, pitches 7 1/3, just shuts him down. He looks fantastic. He's got the lowest ERA in baseball. If you look, there's a statistic where it measures the percent of balls that are hit hard, and he's second behind Clayton Kershaw, but technically he's ahead of Clayton Kershaw because Kershaw doesn't have enough innings because of his injury. He doesn't have enough innings to be a qualifier. So if you're looking at just qualifiers, is Kyle Hendricks is the best in baseball at not giving up hard hits, and he's got the best ERA in baseball. He's just absolutely looks fantastic. And I had a listener that said, should he be the starter on the opening day of the first round of the playoffs? That's a great question. He has done nothing wrong to not deserve it. He's been fantastic. He's been the most consistent starter in this the Cubs have statistically the best rotation in baseball, and he's been the most consistent pitcher on the team, and arguably the best. But the issue is on this team is you've got a guy named Jake Arrieta. Jake Arrieta, for all the struggles that he's had in the middle of the season, don't forget what this guy's season statistics are so far. He's 13-5. He's got a 2.59 ERA, and that's a far cry from where he was last year, but it still puts him as one of the better ERAs in the league. And he's got a whip of 1.03. His stats are ridiculous, and he's going to get votes for the Cy Young, considering unless Clayton Kershaw comes back very quickly and ready to pitch, he's not going to be eligible. You're going to see Jake Arrieta, Madison Bumgarner, and a few other guys get votes for the Cy Young, and he's going to deserve it. But on the other hand, that doesn't mean Kyle Hendricks has pitched poorly. He's just a sort of a young guy that's a number 5 starter, and people are going to ding him for that, and they're going to ding him a little bit for the record. He's 11-7. He's got 7 losses, but he's got a 1.02 WHIP and a 2.17 ERA. He's been consistent. He's just been lights out. And the other ding on him is, we talked about this last week, is he's an old school throwback kind of guy. I know people get super mad when I make the comparison of Greg Maddux, but yeah, I'm not saying he's as good as Greg Maddux. Only time will tell that. Greg Maddux is one of probably the 10 best pitchers in baseball history, and Kyle Hendricks is a kid that made his major league debut in July of 2014, and he was an 8th round pick. So he's got a long way to go to prove this, but stylistically, he's a lot like Greg Maddux. Doesn't have overpowering stuff, pinpoint accuracy, very cerebral with how he pitches. It's been fantastic. So, not to dodge the question is, would I start Kyle Hendricks in a 1-game playoff series? And I mean, in a first game of the first round of the playoff series. And I'm gonna say, I'm gonna dodge the question a little bit. If the season were to start today, I would say I would put him second. I would put Arrieta. And assuming that I could make the order any way I wanted, as I would put Arrieta first, Hendricks second, Lester third, go from there. But honestly, we've got like 6-7 weeks left in the season. So why do I need to make that decision now? Baseball is a funny way of if you just let it play out, it's going to answer its own questions. And one of these two guys, I think, is going to separate himself from the other one. Either look at last year around this time, is we were saying the same thing about Lester and Arrieta, and it became a moot point because Arrieta put on his cape and became Superman. Let's see what happens. Is maybe Arrieta has another bad stretch where he's really struggling, and Arrieta and Hendricks keeps cruising along. Or maybe something happens with Hendricks and it's Arrieta that's the runaway choice. We'll wait and see. So if you're going to put me on the spot, I would do Arietta Hendricks 1-2 punch. But if it's, we're waiting 7 weeks, then might as well wait 7 weeks and try to figure it out there. If you guys have opinions on this matter, please let me in. Let me know. Send me messages and get back to me. I know. The final thing I wanted to talk about was the Cubs didn't do a ton at the trade deadline as they brought in Joe Smith from the Angels. And I was talking about this. I don't know if you guys are familiar with the podcast Ball. It's BAWL. They're friends of mine. They do a really great podcast. Check them out. But they asked me to be on the show in their last episode, and so I went on and I was telling the story about how Chris Bosio, the Cubs pitching coach, mentioned a few weeks ago in an interview that they had a lot of the same arms in the bullpen, and that they needed a fireball guy, and they didn't have really a fireball guy. They didn't really have an odd delivery guy. And lo and behold, they bring in Aroldis Chapman, who's an absolute flamethrower. And then they bring in Joe Smith, who is a funky kind of sidearm, almost underhand type guy. And it gives Chris Bosio more weapons. It gives him, so now they've got a long innings eating guy in Travis Wood who can come in and close if need be. He can just do whatever you need him to, whether it could be Cohen play left field or take an at bat for you. You've got a really good closer in Rondon, who's moving down to a setup guy now. Now you've got your fireballer, you've got your funky guy, you've got lefties, you've got righties. You've got a nice mix in the bullpen. So you've really made that a place of weakness to, I wouldn't say strength, but I would just below strength. Let's see what else. So yeah, I mean, looking at that, is the Cubs really solidified what they're trying to do, and with Jorge Soler coming back and looking great. He didn't look so good in his rehab starts, but coming in and looking great against Oakland, it gives you a lot of weapons, and it really sets the tone for what you can do. And this team is going to be a dangerous team. There's a lot of really good teams, and if the playoffs were to start today, Washington would be a division winner, the Cubs would be a division winner, and San Francisco would be a division winner. And the two wild cards right now would be the Dodgers and the Marlins. And whoever won that one-game series against between the Dodgers and the Marlins would go on to play the Cubs, and San Francisco and Washington would go on and play each other. And the reason that's so good for the Cubs is severalfold. Is one, you don't have to see St. Louis in the playoffs. I don't care what we did to them last year. They're a tough team. They're so tough to beat in the playoffs. I don't want any part of that. You don't have to face the Mets. The Mets have had your number since the playoffs last year. They're a really tough team for you to beat. And right now, you don't have to face them. And the two best teams in the National League, other than you, are the Nationals and the Giants. And one of them is going to lose because they're going to play each other. So you get to face, hopefully, a Clayton Kershaw-less Dodgers. And they're playing fantastic without Clayton Kershaw, which is just absolutely mind-numbing. But they could either play a Miami team who they just beat pretty good recently, and a Dodgers team who is missing Clayton Kershaw. That's who you play in the first round, and then you just have to beat one of the other two really good teams in Washington and San Francisco. So it's about as best as you can shape this up to be. And I'm looking at my messages right now, and I did get one more message that I didn't see before I did the show prep. So one last thing is, somebody asked me why the Cubs kept Chris Coughlin on the roster and sent down Tommy La Stella to the minors. And that one, might seem ridiculous from the surface, but Joe Madden is playing the long game on this one. Is right now they don't particularly need the help that Tommy La Stella. Tommy La Stella is a much better baseball player right now. Last year, Chris Coughlin did a lot for the Cubs. It was really important. This year he's not important, and he's not playing well, and he's not doing a lot for them. Where Tommy La Stella has been very nice cog for this team. But if you were to try to send Chris Coughlin down, you're going to have to get rid of him. He's out of options. You're going to have to let him go, and you lose him to keep Tommy La Stella. Tommy La Stella, you can send back down to the minors. He's got options, and you can keep Chris Coughlin on the roster when you don't really need help because you're playing well right now and everybody's healthy, for the most part. And in a couple of short weeks is you're going to be able to expand the roster and have them both. So why wouldn't you take both if you could have both instead of one? Chris Coughlin's almost definitely not going to be on the playoff roster, but that September call-up when you get to expand the roster is might as well have both. Bring Tommy La Stella up in like 3 weeks, and then you have him and Coughlin for that last month. So that's what I think. Nobody's corroborated that, but I really think that's the reason. Moving on to the White Sox, I don't have much to say. They traded Zach Duke. They didn't make any other moves for whatever reason. They're pretty much out of the playoffs. When you look at the standings, they're so far out from the division lead. They're 10 games out of the division lead behind the Indians. They're 8 games out of the wild card. And not just 8 games, but the Yankees are in front of them, the Astros are in front of them, the Mariners are in front of them, Boston's in front of them, and then there's the 2 wild card teams, Toronto and Detroit. So there's so many teams in front of them. They're not doing enough. They're just playing mediocre baseball. They didn't make any moves. They didn't trade up, trade down. They traded Zach Duke. I guess the only good thing I can say is Tim Anderson got his 3rd walk of his career on Saturday or Sunday. 3rd walk of his career. Woo! That's really all I have to say about the White Sox. And I don't mean this to be derogatory. It's just limited showtime, and they didn't do anything to warrant talking about them, in my opinion. So finally, I'm going to move on to the Bears, and this is a wildly different topic than what I had. So I'm going to sort of put everything I had written and ready to go on the back burner, and let's talk about the 800-pound elephant or the gorilla in the room. Is Hronis Grasu during family day practice at Soldier Field tears his ACL. And the way he went down, it was absolutely an ACL. No doubt about it. Everybody on that field, all the trainers, Hronis Grasu, everybody knew it was a torn ACL. And they didn't announce it right away. They waited till the next day to announce it. He's done for the season. Now, he was a guy that had made a lot of strides. He'd worked hard. He'd put on a little muscle, put on some strength, and was really vying for that to actually earn the starting center job, not just have it handed to him because Will Montgomery got hurt, but to go in and actually earn that position. And it was already a razor-thin group of guys to begin with. You've got your starting tackles, you've got your 2 starting guards, you have your center, and then you have like 1 legitimate backup, and then a bunch of question marks. And Ted Larson probably was going to be that 1 legitimate backup. And so now Ted Larson has to move into they moved him into the starting center role for the time being. And tomorrow is the last practice before breaking camp and playing their first preseason game. So what you're looking at if you're the Bears is you have no backups on the offensive line that are worthwhile. You've got a bunch of question marks. There's no legitimate backups in any of these positions. So if Kyle Long goes down, you're inserting a question mark. If Ted Larson or Cody Whitehair go down, question mark. Bobby Massey goes down, big question mark. If your left tackle can't play, Charles Leno Jr. can't play left tackle this year, what big old question mark. And I keep seeing on Twitter people saying, well, why don't the Bears go make a move? Who are you going to bring in at this point? Are you going to try to talk Manny Ramirez out of retirement? Are you going to see if you can, bring Will Montgomery back? I mean, the obvious thing is to point out and say they shouldn't have cut Matt Slauson. And I'm in that camp. Matt Slauson, old in the tooth, and was not fitting what they wanted to do, and they didn't want him to be a backup guy, I'm guessing. For whatever reason, the Bears made their decision to move away from Matt Slauson. And it would have been fantastic to have him now because you plug him in at your center spot, and you still have a legitimate backup guard in Ted Larson, and you just have your tackle position that's a big who knows. But instead now you have no backups, and if you have any sort of injuries on this offensive line, and this is already a big question mark to begin with, is what are you going to see on this offensive line? I don't know. And that's a big problem, and that's what cost Jerry Angelo his job, if you think about it, is his inability to get an offensive line there. He couldn't draft anybody, couldn't put an offensive line together. It just really sucks. And it's not starting off that great for Ryan Pace. Hopefully this line gels together, plays all 16 games together, and makes it a moot point and shoves it down all of our throats. But when has that happened in Bears history? When was the last time the Bears had all 5 offensive line starters play all 16 games? Was it in the era where John Tate was your left guard or your left tackle, and Fred Miller was your right tackle, and Olin Kreutz was your center? Is that the last time? What was that? That was probably the last time that happened. But regardless, is there's nobody out there right now that's worthwhile picking up that's going to make an impact. Is the time to make an impact on your roster is at the draft and in free agency. In free agency, there's still guys sitting around going, hey guys, I could play, put me in, coach, sign me. But nobody believes those guys can play. So for all intents and purposes, free agency is over. Draft is definitely over, and your next best hope is to try to make a trade, see if anybody has depth on the offensive line that you can snag away, and the question is, what are you willing to trade to get it? So worries me a lot. This offensive line, not gonna lie, is really starting to worry me. Let's see, what else did I have? And it's hilarious because I'm looking at my moves, or my moves. Look at my sweet moves, guys. I'm looking at my notes, and I did write down before this injury happened, did the Bears make enough offensive line moves in the offseason? Ha! I answered that question. No. And the other thing about this offensive line is every day Ted Larson is getting into a fight with somebody on this team. And it's gotten to the point where it's moved beyond, I like his attitude, I like the toughness he's bringing, blah, blah, blah. He's playing whistle to whistle. He's not taking any crap from the D-line. At what point do you cross beyond that and you're just being childish and a jerk? Like, I don't know what's going on in there, but at Family Day, the day that Bears lowered ticket prices to, and I'm going to rant about this in a minute, is they lower the ticket prices so people that can't really afford go to a game, they come to this open practice at Soldier Field. It's supposed to be a cool thing. And what do they get treated to? The starting center, Hronis Grasu, tearing his ACL, and a huge fight breaking out, Ted Larson in the middle, and Kyle Long, who's coming off a calf injury, running all the way across the field to jump in the pile, get into a fight over nothing, over stupid stuff. It's childish. this team, John Fox needs to get control of this team. He's too busy, trying to stifle the media and shut them down to actually, control his team. This is a prove-it camp for Ego Ferguson and Will Sutton. Is either one of those guys going to step up and make that rotation in the defensive line? You've already got Mitch Unrein in there. You've got Mitch Unrein's in there. You've got Akeem Hicks is in there, and Eddie Goldman is in there. Who else is going to be in that line? Who else is going to be in there? It's going to be a big fight. On this team is how is Kevin White going to look? He's looked all right in training camp. Nothing to, he doesn't look like Jerry Rice out there. He doesn't look like Odell Beckham, but he looks all right. You've got, what started the last 2 seasons as on paper looking like a strength at wide receiver is last year became just an absolute catastrophe. And this year it's getting a little scary as well. Is Kevin White, who's number 1 draft pick from last year, hasn't played a snap yet, and he's not looking fantastic, and he looks all right in training camp. You've got Alshon Jeffrey, who's just like last year nursing soft tissue injuries. You've got Eddie Royal in concussion protocol, and you're watching guys like Mark Mariani and Daniel Braverman and the likes of them in the training camp. It's a question mark. I don't know what we're going to get out of wide receiver. So we've got a questionable offensive line, shaky offensive line. They just lost their center and has no backups. You've got a wide receiver core that's you think would be a strength, but you never know with injuries and such. You've got Zach Miller, who's far and away your best tight end, and then a bunch of question marks. Who's actually gonna step up on this line? Or in this tight end group? You've got a converted defensive tackle. You've got a guy that you made a trade for last year. You've got an undrafted rookie. You just got a bunch of question marks, and Zach Miller's in the concussion protocol. At least the one good thing is, and I don't mean this lightheartedly, but Matt Forte tore his hamstring, and he's out something like 6 weeks. So he's probably not even going to start the regular season because of the hamstring injury. And that's the reason that you don't pay a 30-some-year-old running back, is those things start happening. I was going to mention that Kevin Mawai, the really good center from the Tennessee Titans, who's retired now, he was in camp to help Cronus Grasu and help him get better and help him tear his ACL. Woo! Brandon Boykins, they signed him to see what he can do, and he goes on injured reserve. Daniel Braverman looks pretty good. So all in all, this is it's starting to shape up to be a scary season. I really had high expectations. Let's see them play 1 or 2 preseason games, and I'll give you my impression. But right now, I think the defensive line is going to be better, but that defensive backs sort of scare me. The safeties and the corners, I don't think we have a lot of depth there. Wide receiver injuries looking scary again. Tight ends are razor thin. Offensive line, there's no backups. A lot of question marks. And hopefully that Ryan Pace and John Fox and Vic Fangio and Dow Logans all have answers for these questions. Or else it's going to be another long season. And that's really going to wrap it up, because I don't have anything Bulls or Blackhawks related. So thank you guys so much for listening. And if you guys have questions or comments or anything, please feel free to send them to me at Twitter at Swerski Sports, Facebook.com/Swerski Sports, SwerskiSports.com. And until next time, bear down.
What a lucky break! The good Lord wants the Cubs to win.
We think Ditka and God for all they have provided.
Cubs win! Cubs win! Cubs win!
Oh, I don't want her. You can have her. She's a Packer fan. She can't fit in my van.
And she looks like Remember, New Yorkers, smoking crack is not legal on planes.
Bears 31 to -7.
The Bears.
Oh, when the Bears go bearing down.